Hello and welcome to Talking with Fat People. I am host Eric over here. That's Felix. And the other people in the back there, Delilah. This is Delilah right here. Anyway, we're driving to Utah. It's we got 340 miles to go, which is about 5 hours about. And we have been talking about all sorts of shit all night long, and it's now morning and light out and everything. So we're gonna decide what we want to talk about this morning. I'm not sure what we want to talk about, except we're in some scenic desert here. I know that.
I know what I want to talk about.
What's that?
I want to talk about modern society and nihilism.
Okay.
You mean nihilism? Hey, my vernacular is my own. Alright, what I mean by modern society and nihilism is that Schopenhauer and Nietzsche said that our society would be defined by the way we overcame nihilism. That it was not so much a philosophical perspective as it was an intellectual, ontological disease. And we had to overcome this disease in order to basically deal with the death of God in philosophy and the realization that what we had originally used to ascribe meaning to the human experience was not correct. And I feel that currently society has two choices which they feel are their only choices. The first is to wholeheartedly embrace this nihilism and the fuck it culture of I have no real power to change my surroundings, and as a result I am going to take the position that nothing really matters and I should seek only hedonist goals. And then there's the other position, which is moral absolutism, which argues that we have to go back to that anthropocentric interpretation where humanity is a unique construct found nowhere else, and what we interpret as correct is always correct.
That's not what absolutism. That's not necessitated by absolutism. Look, we can say simply that we want to have if there exists a single protocol or criterion that can provide for us an evaluatory mechanism to determine whether something is just or unjust, then we ought to use it, you know? If it doesn't exist, fine. But it does exist.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we use that?
Well, what's the method that works?
The negative rights framework.
Well, I don't think negative rights can answer nihilism, because
Sure they can, because nihilism isn't a real thing. It is like not really. I know. It's like I'm not gonna try. That's what it is. I'm not gonna try hard.
Well, I don't know, because when I look at the active nihilist who tries to destroy the norms of the status quo, I think they try really hard. Like,
such as whom? What's an example of that?
Anarchists, Zapatistas, your typical insurgent group, any country that's currently involved in civil war. Like, those are all instances in which nihilism is being confronted in a way that is not at all beneficial. Like,
I don't think those things are confronting nihilism.
Well, like, I think that active nihilism means that we have to try to change the norms because the norms are wrong for whatever specific reason.
Well, I'm trying to change the norms, and I'm not remotely nihilistic.
So you don't believe, like, what kind of nihilism? Because, like, the way that I understand it is there's 4 kinds of nihilism, and the 4th kind is the worst kind because it negates meaning in life and everything which life entails, like joy and happiness and sadness and all of it. And, like, that's the kind of nihilism which I feel we have to confront. The existential nihilist, because that's the nihilism which encompasses cosmic nihilism, moral nihilism.
Hey, well, what difference does it make? It's pronounced both ways. I've heard it pronounced both ways many times. Nihilism, nihilism, not nohilism. You can say nohilism, nihilism, or nihilism. Any of those are fine.
Okay, so, like, where I was going was Where was I going? God damn it.
I don't know, but you were saying basically there's different kinds of nihilism, and the thing I'm talking about won't solve for that. And I said, well, look, you have a couple possible options here. Either you are dismissing the validity of human experience, which is what I basically think of as nihilist, which is to say,
Yeah.
there is no solution for me. I'm going to fixate on my condemnation-driven worldview in order to punish the universe for failing to provide me what I think I actually need. Because it's not like these things happen in a vacuum. Somebody's feeling as though some of their needs are not being met.
Yeah.
Usually it's an achievement need that's not being met. It's like it's a psychological phenomenon. I agree with whomever said that thing you're saying. It's not even a philosophical position.
Yeah.
It's just somebody who is in a place where they don't feel as though there's a viable means for them to move from that place to a better place, then they engage in nihilistic language, and usually that's the full extent of it. There are people actually engaging in violence and stuff like that. That's not nihilism. That's either crime or it's ideologically driven. So, I mean, and the thing is, if it's ideologically driven, then we have to evaluate that based on the criteria of whether or not the mechanism you're using is evaluatorily sound. And it's not because of negative rights, which is more evaluatorily sound. And that's the thing, it's the most sound of all the approaches. It's the least self-contradictory. It's the least likely to produce untenable results. So we might as well embrace that.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is the thing that the problem I have with the negative rights framework's ability to address existential nihilism is that if the person is already an existential nihilist and believes that the highest values devaluate themselves and there is no meaning to anything, why should they give credence to, like, if life
Why
ultimately...
should they evaluate themselves?
No, like, furthermore than that, like, if life ultimately is meaningless, that extends past my own life. Not only is my life meaningless, but the life of my neighbor is meaningless. Thus, why should I care if I infringe on their negative rights or not?
That. It's not even that, because meaningless is a meaning, right?
Well,
if it's truly meaningless, then there's not sufficient meaning to justify any sort of violence or disregard for the other either.
Well, that's a super meta interpretation of meaning, like, because meaning does have multiple definitions, and I think the way that I'm using it right now is a specific purpose or determining factor for an action or a thing. That's what I mean by the lack of meaning, that there is no purpose behind living.
Okay, right, and I agree that the issue of purpose is really the question that everybody wrestles with is one of purpose.
Yeah.
We can't understand the universe at all except through the lens of our own purpose. Period. 100%.
Yeah.
And people don't think of that as being the case, but it is. And so all of our meanings are filtered through our own purposes, but we agree to sort of designate certain of those meanings aphorism status, whereby we agree to say, I'm going to use this in this argument here. I can say, well, we shouldn't do that because that will end up chopping off the legs of all those toddlers. And that's not morally acceptable, and we make some argument, right? Then the whole, talk about a actual social contract. The actual social contract is, if I use something in an argument, and you use it, I have to afford it the same way that I ask you to afford it. You know, so that it's reciprocal burdens is the real social contract. And argumentation is the only way in which anything ever happens. So when we look at examples of nihilists or violent people or whatever else, people who we think are not realizing the potentiality of human existence and or are endangering the realization for others, then we're talking about a failure to make a failure to make arguments, and we're talking about the wrong arguments winning.
Okay, well, I don't believe that nihilism doesn't have arguments. I believe that nihilism only seeks to critique, and that falls into the problem of never offering anything new. If you're a purely responsive ideology, you never create any new philosophy to basically fix the holes which you're poking in the world. And I do believe that's a problem of nihilism. It devolves into an endless spiral of meta in which you inherently evaluate things.
I don't think it pokes any holes, though, is the problem. It claims that's what its goal is, but it can't possibly do so because its mechanism is SCEP. It falls under its own mechanism. Absolutely, SCEP can be applied to SCEP, and it falls apart. If, in fact, we are not to take any of these, if they are attacking me on according to a normal paradigm where they're required to say, here's some inconsistencies, or here's the conditionality web, and here I'm critiquing that on the soundness of the conditionality web because your links are weak or whatever, fine. If they are attacking it on the grounds that the conditionality web itself ought not be considered, then but to make the argument requires the conditionality web to be considered, therefore their argument itself falls apart. The argument doesn't exist without the conditionality web.
But as an active nihilist, you wouldn't be doing that kind of thing in the first place. You would be saying, this round is ultimately meaningless. The only way we can truly confront the meaninglessness of this round is to expose it to others by offering either a double win or a double loss. This forces the issue of the lack of meaning behind ascribing victory or losses into the foreground. Because outside of this specific paradigm, these victories or losses are not.
But if I were to say, if you were to say that, my answer would be, unfortunately, even if my opponent is correct about the nature of wins and losses, he has created a new class of double, namely the double win or double loss, then it becomes the problem area. So what my opponent fails to understand is that he doesn't get to stand outside the ecosystem and make changes to it without impacting himself. If he wants to blow up this anthill, he's an ant too.
Yes.
That means he doesn't have any anthill to live in any either. So remember this, Judge, if you vote for this nihilist approach and the double win, double loss notion and the meaningless notion, then you embrace that meaning unavoidably.
And thus you're not nihilist anymore.
You can't embrace the meaning while simultaneously being nihilist.
Well, like, as far as that goes in the round, like, yeah, I do disagree with running nihilism in round because I've read a lot of literature that says that you shouldn't embrace nihilism, but I guess I'm still attached to the original argument of, like, I think that society has a fundamental problem in the way it's approaching existential nihilism, and that scares the shit out of me because it could lead to a lot of very scary roads, and I don't think that negative rights answers these scary roads.
Okay, well, but look, I think your scary roads there, the problem is you're fixating on content rather than structure. So that, in fact, nihilism is not a threat because it's just the content. Nihilism is filling the role it needs to fill on that, in that set. In the set of all ideologies, that role will be filled in some capacity or another. There will always be the poor, even if they're filthy rich, right?
Okay.
You have to have an uneven division of resources or you don't have freedom. Freedom necessitates inequality because people choose different things. They get different results.
Yes.
So once you acknowledge that if we want freedom, there will be inequality, then you realize in this set, there will always be a portion of the set known as the poor. To try to get rid of that portion of the set is to say, let's get rid of the bottom of the table, but keep the top of the table, or vice versa. It's not a table anymore. You cut part of it apart, and it doesn't work like that.
Well, yeah, like I completely agree with the idea that the average interpretation of life as being this dichotomy of really like euphorious moments and then like deplorable lows. Like that's one of the things that I believe fosters the idea of nihilism. The fact that I cannot exist in a world of constant euphoria shows that value is ultimately meaningless because I can't constantly experience it. And I think that does a disservice to the intricacies in life. Like, if music and life were equatable.
What do you think the maximum number? What do you think your recommended daily allowance of euphoria is? 10 liters?
I don't think there should be such a thing as a daily recommended allotment. I think that it's entirely dependent on the context of the situation.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. Should a person, is it healthier to experience more euphoria or more elation?
That's an interesting question, because, like, outside, like, field-specific interpretations, I kind of use the two as synonyms.
Any time we take that question seriously and answer it, try to parse it out. Is there a distinction here to be parsed? Let's see.
Yeah, like, because elation and euphoria, like,
what do you think of the sublime?
Sublime.
Is that under... See, like...
Sublime seems different, right?
Alright, tell me if this falls under ENTP. One of the things that, like, I like to do in debate is, I forget the specific name, but there's a group of French mathematicians and philosophers who argued that the way that language was being used in the common place was very detrimental to the idea of language in itself. They said that the lack of the definition of a sphere is different from the definition of a ball, and the definition of an orb, and the definition of a field. And these definitions have importance, and they should be used in the correct instances. And society typically doesn't care. They use things synonymously. So, like, I do believe that we should try to find some differentiation between the sublime and elation and euphoria. But then sometimes I feel that these distinctions are for naught if these things are all essentially synonymous, and that we're essentially like performing intellectual masturbation and just being meta for the sake of being meta.
Well, I think it's fair to say that when public policy is at stake, on the line, or being discussed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in that instance, the problem lies in the fact that individuals have excessive conviction such that they are willing to impose their perspectives upon others at the end of a gun with inadequate justification to do so. So when we want to blow shit up by parsing the shit out of it and we're talking about issues, it matters because as my mother always said about saving money and stuff like that, every little bit counts. And even if this discourse doesn't cause some congressman to vote differently, if it gets out on the internet and somebody watches it who hasn't considered some of these perspectives, it's going to cause them to change the way they think about government a little bit. I think people talk to me, and it does, even if they walk away shaking their head, disagreeing, and think I'm an idiot, those ideas are ideas they haven't really been exposed to before. Interestingly, people just aren't exposed to these ideas very much, and people are not in the habit of thinking about their assumptions. When I do the troll problem with the personality typing, I say the troll gets a 10% food tax. He collects a 10% tax. I intentionally choose the word tax because a fair number of people say we'll pay the tax.
Yeah.
Now, the thing I'm describing is in no way, shape, or form a tax, right?
Yeah.
It's a monster who's stealing from you when you cross the river.
Yeah.
But because I call it a tax,
It's justified.
a decent number of people say pay the tax.
Yeah.
Few people say that's not a tax. Nobody says that's not a tax.
That's robbery.
That's robbery.
Are you saying that the government is the troll?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I would only buy that in the instance where the troll is also your bodyguard.
But, okay. He keeps the other trolls away. It's like...
Then it's a tax.
Well,
It's like the mafia paying, like saying,
dude,
one will screw you over. Yeah, it's still extortion, but the fundamental idea is that we will defend you from other people trying to extort you.
Okay, well, so you say that's the only duty. First of all, that's not part of the actual story. I've never said that the troll connects by the troll. That's a good notion to include potentially, though. But what I want to know is that the only duty you would have to perform for it to be officially a tax, even if they didn't want that duty?
Yes, I believe that social contract theory, the only obligation, well, apart from civic infrastructure, that the government has to the population is to maintain a safe atmosphere.
Okay,
Just
so,
make sure we're not being set on fire, we're not being invaded, we're not being colonialized.
Felix,
Uh-huh.
I've decided that I'm going to protect you this trip, and I'm going to charge you a $100 tax right now.
Okay.
So, is that okay?
I would argue that one, status quo is probably sufficient to protect me. There's already police, there's already a military. I don't
Why
think
would you afford the troll this ability to do that?
because I don't have the ability to stop another troll. And there's no other system presented in that thought experiment that would lead me to believe that there's a mechanism that's already in place to solve for the other trolls.
Well,
like if I had a gun...
But you already know that it's possible to, and in fact, one of the viable solutions is to kill the troll.
If I have a gun, I am totally down with that solution then. I would no longer think of it as a tax. I would see it as an unfair coercive tactic because I have the ability to defend myself. So I would say, get out of my way and stop trying to tax me or I will shoot you.
But see, the point I'm trying to make is that the taxation legitimacy doesn't come from the fact that this entity affords protection.
Uh-huh.
It ought to come from the consent of those who are taxed, at least in part, and it ought to come from it needs to be voluntary in some way. You know, it's like
I think the way
they don't identify themselves as part of the country of control. You know, like I'm part of troll country now.
Uh-huh. Okay, so like because they don't get to choose whether or not the troll threatens them, they shouldn't have to be imposed the tax.
Well, by your definition of a tax, I can go up to anybody and with two people, and Bob says, "Hey, I'm gonna beat you up now," and I go, "No, you're not, Bob. You go away now." Bob goes away, and I can demand you money from you.
Okay. If this is happening in a world of a government, I'm pretty sure the government would step in and say, "Bob, you don't have the right to hit Felix. What are you thinking?" And as a result, I would have no legitimate reason to believe you in saying that you're the only thing to prevent Bob from hitting me. I would argue that cops are probably enough of a reason for Bob not to hit me.
But why are they a more legitimate sort? I mean, like, okay, well, they are helping you. And when they help you, they'll take a tax. When I help you, I'll take the tax. That's all. I can help you too. And then so the other people, we're all going to help you. We're all going to take the tax.
Okay, I would say that your help consists of saying, "Bob, don't hit me," whereas their help consists of, one, preventing him physically from hitting me through their monopoly on force.
Okay, hold on now. The cops can't do that. They can only respond. Only my service here, Joe's protection service, we can do that because we're not the cops.
Like hold him so that he doesn't hit me?
Well, I mean, you don't know. We'll have to see what happens if he tries to hit you. But you see, you don't know either with the cops.
Okay.
Because you haven't had, Bob wasn't here. The cops were here. Bob wasn't here.
Okay.
The cops just were walking by. They saw you were fine. They just walked by.
Yes.
Now, we don't know what would have happened if Bob had been here and tried to hit you then. The cops probably would have let it happen. Unlike me, I'm a better protector than they are.
I don't know about that.
Well, you don't know that is right, so why don't you pay us both then?
Because I have some... No, I don't mean that I don't know that they're not better protectors. I know they're better protectors. I don't know you're a good protector.
Have they ever protected you from Bob?
No, and that's my reasoning.
There are worse protectors from Bob than I am.
No. What I believe is the lack of examples of you protecting me in any instance...
I just gave you one. And who wasn't here to protect you?
No.
Who was not here?
All right, so with the Bob example, I believe that you have a less legitimate claim to the ability to defend my person because I have never seen you once intervene in any situation to protect any other person.
I prevented Bob from hurting.
That's one instance. I have seen more instances of cops stepping in to intervene.
But how many instances, now look, how many instances have you had to have an adult human being intervene between you and another adult human being in your life? Probably not that many. Now what we do know is that in this instance where Bob was very much threatening you, the police were nowhere to be seen, not protecting you, whereas I was. All the evidence on the table points to you should pay me the tax, not them.
Okay, so are you going to be the one holding Bob responsible for my physical injuries after he hits me?
If he hurts you, yeah, I will.
Okay.
I will be responsible as well.
Then,
I won't let him hurt you though, that's the point. I'm better than they are. They're protect
Well,
you.
no, you're more proximal to the immediate harm, but you're not better.
I'm more attentive to my job duties because I'm private sector. That's why. Or private
Okay.
sector taxation.
Private sector taxation is not private sector taxation. That is consumerism. You are providing a private service, which I am buying,
Well,
not
you
providing a
said
civic service.
you are the one who told me all of it. What does that have to do to get back to tax when the social contract is protect somebody?
Exactly, but you are not a government. I have no method via social contract theory of holding you
As
accountable.
far as I knew, what made me a government was that I was able to use force to protect you.
Okay, I guess my original statement was unclear. I do believe that the government has the legitimacy of force only as a means of protecting its citizens. However, I don't believe that social contract theory means that private sector individuals have that same ability. Because I believe that social contract theory is a purely public matter, which would involve me being able to complain about my treatment in a public facility.
Look, you think it doesn't include that, but you forgot to check page 3, line 47 of the contract, where it says that, right? Oh, wait, that's right. There is no contract. There's nothing to check. There's nothing to agree to.
There is a social contract.
Where is it then? Let me see it.
Okay,
I want to see my signature.
exactly. Therein lies the question. There is a social contract. Whether or not you consider yourself a signatory to that
Where is
contract is a different
Is
question.
it specific?
Yes, it
something
is.
Specific.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so in other words, you can tell me whether something is in or not in the social contract,
Yes.
and everyone will agree with you.
Depending on whether they're living constitutionalists or they believe the Constitution needs to be interpreted.
So your social contract theory is constitutionalist in nature?
I don't like constitutionalism. I think we need to interpret it. I think a literal interpretation of the Constitution leads to people saying, this says all men were created equal, so women don't get the right to vote.
Is the Constitution our social contract?
As long as we get to interpret it, yes.
Okay, then that's not a social contract theory, that's constitutionalism.
No, constitutionalism is the Constitution was written the way it is and should be interpreted literally, word for word.
Social contract theory says that regardless of which state you're in, you've agreed to trade liberty for protection and standardization.
Yes, I do, yes.
It's not specific to the United States,
Uh-huh.
and so as a consequence, I'm asking you, where does it say what's in the social contract? What things are in there?
Okay, so if you want to go that level, then I guess the Magna Carta also has references to it. I mean,
So is that the social contract or an example of a social contract?
Okay, so there is not one global social contract.
So we don't know what's in it. We don't know what it says. We don't know what it's excluded. But we know that I'm signed on to it.
We know that the United States' social contract theory is, and we know that you subscribe to our protection, and as a result are a signatory to it.
You can't claim legitimacy for social contract theory if you're going to then only apply it in one place and the rest of the world doesn't apply. That's obviously a bad theory.
No, I'm not saying that it doesn't apply around the rest of the world. You specifically said that where is the global social contract theory? There is no global government, thus there is no global contract theory.
No, what I'm saying is social contract theory is an idea that says we are engaged in a social contract, right?
Uh-huh.
And if it were to be correct, then I would be committed to a contract. However, if in fact it were correct, we'd be able to see the same social contract in multiple places.
Mm-hmm.
We don't. We know that social contract theory doesn't mean anything because multiple different things that are completely unrelated to each other are ascribed to it.
Okay, so then what do you respond to, like, numerous places which spring this up inherently? Like, they don't need somebody to teach them social contract theory. They come up with it on their own.
Okay, well, what do you mean they come up with it?
Like the Iroquois League, a federation of Native American tribes that agreed to share certain societal norms and certain levels of restrictions upon each other in order to benefit the entirety of the group.
Okay, they did
That's
not
a social
come up with
contract.
social contract theory. They came up with a social contract.
Yeah, a federation, a social federation, a contract.
It said, here's the thing.
We're about to pass the Utah border.
Congratulations, Utah, for existing. Here's the thing, though. Yes, they created a form of governance. That does not prove social contract theory at all. It just shows you that, in fact, once again, some form of government trades liberty for security. That doesn't make it the right thing to do, nor does it make it proof that anybody has entered into some sort of social contract they never agreed to.
I don't know. I don't think that agreeing to it is the signature, because you could sign it and then not actually adhere to the doctrine. Like, we see that everywhere.
You can't have non-optional contracts, okay? A non-optional contract is not a contract. contract is an agreement.
Yeah, and if you didn't agree, then it's not a contract. Thus, social contract theory defeats itself. I get the idea that hypothetically and theoretically, it's a self-defeating concept. But what I don't agree with is the idea that we should negate social contract theory as a whole, because in the philosophical sense, its truth table eventually turns out to be wrong. I don't think that the world is equivocal to a truth table.
I think it's worse than that. I think that social contract theory, because it doesn't mean anything except to say it's justified to violate your rights. That's all it says. It doesn't say why. It doesn't have a why. If it had a why, it would have a warrant. It doesn't have a warrant because it says, because that's a duck that's made out of metal and sinks. It's not a duck. But no, it's not a duck then. It is or it isn't, right? You can't be like, oh, it's social contract theory. It's not a fucking contract. It's not social contract theory. Therefore, it's just this lie that's used to justify bullshit. Well, it's okay to violate your rights and stuff. It's in the contract.
Okay, so
you can't see.
Okay, so the idea that the lack of all right, so I'm trying to get this straight. Social contract theory is dependent on the idea of contracts having informed consent. Like, you have to consent to the contract, right?
The idea of social contract theory is we are bound to obey. It is binding. We have to give up our shit so that we get this other shit in return. Just as in the contract, if I give you money, you have to give me my food.
Yes, exactly.
If I give up my liberty, you have to give me protection. It's supposed to bind the government to its duties. But what it ends up doing is justifying the government violating your rights.
I don't think in the majority of instances that happens. I think that...
That's because most of the rights violations you currently are undergoing, you don't consider rights violations. Because they've been so normalized.
Well, okay, like, what's an instance of a normalized right violation?
Taxation.
Okay, taxation. The reason that I think voluntary taxation would be bad is it probably amount to zero taxation. Like, there would be nobody who would voluntarily say, I'm going to get, especially in a perspective where the individual gain is completely the goal of society, not communitarianism. Like, I don't think there would be anybody who would stand up and say that I'm going to be completely individualistic, except in the instance of taxation, in which I believe communitarianism outweighs individualism.
Now, you know taxation was voluntary all the way through World War II.
Really?
And people paid it a lot of times because they felt as though it was just. Once, after World War II, taxation skyrocketed.
It became compulsory?
People stopped paying it because it was unreasonable. And then it was made compulsory.
Okay. I guess my response to that is I don't exactly trust the layperson to determine what should be compulsory and what should not be. Because if we live in a world where every individual gets to self-determine at that level, then we end up living in a world where very, very detrimental actions can be justified because it's at the individual level after all.
I have got there's a tax I'm willing to keep, and I think is the least offensive tax. It's still offensive, but it's the least offensive.
Property tax?
No, sales tax. The reason I think sales tax is the least offensive tax is because it is progressive for a flat tax.
Because everybody pays the same one in the state.
It's not unfair like a progressive tax, but it's not regressive. Like, for example, the most regressive tax of all is traffic infractions. Any kind of infraction is the most regressive tax. I mean, it's definitely a tax because you haven't done anything wrong. There's no victim. They're not taking justice for anyone. It doesn't actually have the impact that people think it does of sort of making the roads safer. That's nonsense. People drive whatever speed they feel safe, and then they either get a ticket or they don't. I stop in time to get that cop not pull me over or I don't. It had nothing to do with how I'm going to drive the rest of the trip. It might slow me down for a couple of miles. That's it.
Yeah.
So we know that's a tax. It's not justified.
But it's a tax.
It's a tax. And it's the most regressive tax of all because not only does it support people not be able to afford this traffic ticket, but more often than not, they'll end up not going to court or missing something, and then they get a bench warrant, and then they're fucked, you know?
Yeah.
Just like Ferguson. Ferguson is a perfect example of government. That's what they do. Well, go give black people more tickets. We need more money. They don't need more money, of course. They need more money to continue doing more of that. Same shit.
Well, I guess then I feel that communitarianism's philosophy has just been caught up in a whirlwind of societal bullshit of no fault of its own.
I mean, it can't ever be caught up as anything else. If you don't have a logically consistent system, it's always going to be used to justify bullshit, because logically consistent systems can't do that.
Well, like, I don't think the system is inconsistent. I feel that a lot of people who don't subscribe to the logic fully piggyback on that shit and use it as an excuse to essentially screw others.
You think communitarianism is consistent in any way, shape, or form, and also think that it's either going to happen without coercion, or that the coercion is justified and you don't get to count the harms from the coercion, then you're insane.
No, I believe that the harms of the coercion exist. I just believe that the safety afforded to me by the coercion is either equal to or greater than the harms of the coercion itself. Like, I believe that, like, I've been a victim of profiling and I hate that shit, but I believe that that shitty, terrible, racist inconvenience is worth making my street a little bit safer so that I don't have to worry about letting my nephews play in the front yard.
Okay, fine. The thing is, I had actually the same experience. I was driving home from dropping off Delilah in high school one day, and it was like 10 in the morning, and I looked like this, basically, and I was driving my old car that I no longer have, really beat up looking. I pulled into my driveway after, like, a cop was going up Sultana, I was going down Sultana. He passed me, or was about to pass me, or whatever. I turned into my driveway. I guess he thought that was suspicious, like I was trying to get away from him or something. He came, pulled up behind me in the driveway, and checked my ID. I didn't feel like he was doing something wrong. I felt like he was protecting my house.
Yeah.
He didn't know I was the guy who lived there. I appreciated it.
Yeah.
That's not a problem. What's a problem isn't stuff like that, where they check you, they let you go. I don't really have a problem with that. I have a problem with them taking your money, stealing from you.
Yeah.
And I have a problem with Social Security. Social Security is appalling. Do you know that every $5,000 the government takes from you, you invested in compound interest, it's $2 million after 40 years.
Yes.
Now, the federal government is taking from you approximately a third of your paycheck and saving it for your retirement. For you, it would be decades and decades and decades. That's millions and millions and millions.
Well, Social Security runs out in 2032, so I don't get it. I won't be 65 before then. But the way that I look at it is, as far as public welfare systems go, the only reason that I personally think that Social Security is a joke is that not to say that my people's struggle are unique and special and different from everybody else's, and as a result should be evaluated at some greater rate, but undocumented Latin American immigrants pump millions and millions of dollars into the Social Security system every year, which they're never going to see. And that's why I think that Social Security is a joke. However, I am a communitarian, and I believe that I don't care if you think it's unfair that you have to support the handicapped. It's morally wrong as a society to let them die, so
you don't
tough cookies.
Hey, first of all, number one, you're assuming that solvency exists. In fact, that these handicapped people wouldn't have a perfectly good life without this. That's bullshit, number one. Okay, so let's dismiss that right out of hand.
Okay.
Every fucking liberal policy like this, there's an assumption that because people take the money, that they need the money. That because people take the food stamps, and they didn't have the food stamps, they fucking starve. That's simply not the case.
Yeah, I know. There's no absolute starvation within the United States. Nobody starves to death
Worse than that. Worse than that. The justification for Social Security is not supposed to be that I need to help protect other people who need help. It's supposed to be the government tells me I am not capable of making my own retirement savings decisions, so they're going to make my retirement savings decisions for me. That's what Social Security is supposed to be. That's what it was originally sold as. And then it came to include help for disabled people and stuff like that. Okay, well, do I think that the government should give money to disabled people? No. Do I think that we have any obligation to support them? No. Do I think that if the government doesn't give money to people and they suffer harms, that we've somehow failed as a group? No. Because there's no such fucking we. That's not me. I'm not in your fucking we. So stop trying to make me be in your we.
Okay, so I guess my problem with that is the idea that, like, I'm not trying to say that individuals who are currently marginalized in the status quo have no means of alleviating their own, like, harms. What I'm trying to say is when the system is inherently trying to force you into a position where you cannot voice your political opinion and you have no feasible power within, like, the governmental atmosphere, that's a really bad thing. And that's what occurs in a non-communitarian atmosphere.
What do you think would happen if all of a sudden the U.S. economy had pumped into it, every single working American making 33% more money? Are you sure those disabled people still would be so desperately in need of their pittance from Social Security when all the working members of their family are now making 33% more money because the government stopped stealing it?
Okay, so what I would say is, first of all, you're assuming that everybody has a family structure which gives a damn about their living conditions. Second of all, you're assuming that the private institution which you're saying will solve gives a damn about their living conditions. Like the fact that the government had to, like, the state government in Chicago had to pass legislation that said power companies couldn't cut out elderly people's power in the winter for failure to pay because they would die of, like...
What I'm telling you, Felix, is that you were giving me an example of Detroit, which is a pretty good example. But you keep talking about people who are going to suffer if they lose their government things, right?
Yeah, communitarian aid.
So you have predictive harms that come when we remove real harms.
Not predictive. The fact that
predictive.
It actually happened. I'm not saying this would have happened. There was the only reason the government had to step in was because there was already instances of electrical companies cutting off power and gas companies cutting off gas, which led to elderly people freezing to death.
Okay, my question,
that falls under your definition of behavioral taxation.
Listen to me. This year, right? I have had multiple problems, including I've had my power shut off. Not because I forgot to pay the bill, because I just didn't pay the bill. I didn't ever pay it. I don't know why. I didn't pay it again now. But anyway, it cost me $1,000 total, including the bill and everything, to get turned back on. Now, the fact is, there's one person to blame for that.
Is that you?
Me. Right? It's not anybody else. There's one person who has responsibility to fix that. Me, not anybody else. Now look, here's the deal. We talk about these people we harmed. Even if you were right about the predictions, you are neglecting the fact that right now, every day, millions of Americans are getting harmed. You are ignoring that harm's alleviation. What about the poor person who's right on the brink? They just didn't have to. They have kind of a big family. They make too much. The progressive tax thing, it doesn't excuse them all their taxes. They have to pay a bunch of extra taxes now. They have to make all these cuts. They have to make all these sacrifices. They're not rich. They're living at the very end of their means. And yet, they have to give some of their money so that somebody else who doesn't solve their own problems will get their money while they have solved their own problems still and have less money to do it with. It's bullshit.
Okay, so specifically, I have a couple of problems with that. The first is I don't believe that our current mechanism for energy distribution is communitarian. I don't think that we should have to pay for energy. I think that that should be supplied by the government. So you having to pay an unfair tax on being supplied energy is wrong for me inherently. So I don't have any qualms with your position on that being unfair.
You don't have a right to energy.
I think of that as a part of civic infrastructure. So social contract theory says yes, I do.
Okay.
That's a part of my protection from the state of nature.
You failed to defend social contract theory, so it's no longer standing.
Okay, no. Social contract theory, I believe, exists to defend me not only from physical violence, but a state of nature. And a state of nature includes a lack of, like, actual power.
You can tell me all the impacts of social contract theory all you want, but it does remain standing. It has no impacts. Well, you haven't defended the fact, you haven't defined it as anything. You ignore that it isn't defined as anything. So it can't possibly have any fucking impact.
It does have a definition. It's just that that definition is not universal.
It's just that you can make it whatever you feel like to support whatever argument you're arguing. That's not an actual warrant. It's bullshit.
I'm not trying to be conditional. I'm saying that the idea that there has to be a globalized interpretation of social contract doesn't deny the fact that social contract can exist in multiple facets. Just because the social contract that the Iroquois League came to is different from mine.
Listen, but we know, you've already acknowledged that we agree that this contract, it's not specific. It doesn't say anything specifically. In fact, it manifests differently in different cultures, right?
Yes.
And we agree that nobody actually agreed to the contract.
I don't agree to that.
I didn't agree to it.
I said that
you didn't even tell me what's in the contract I supposedly agreed
Yes,
to.
I did. I just gave you two specific things, which are obligations of the social contract theory.
Those are different. Do I have to obey the Iroquois social contract, the U.S. Constitution, or what?
Which one do you live in?
That's not relevant to my question.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not, because
if you live in the Iroquois League,
you're telling me I am subject to a social contract, and that the contract I'm subject to is random, okay? Right? It's random. It's entirely on where you're born. And that, nevertheless, it confers onto me duties and obligations. Then it has no warrant, because it's not a contract. I didn't sign it. It's not a contract that anybody can know what it actually means. It's subject to change at all times by only one party in the contract. And even if the government is North Korea, I am still receiving the benefits I'm supposed to receive in a social contract, and technically, then I am obligated to defend that government. Now, you might say, well, that government is illegitimate for this other reason, but that just drives home the point that your social contract theory means shit.
No.
Doesn't mean anything.
Okay, one, social contract theory is not a one-way street. There's not a monopoly of power on social contract theory. If the government fails to uphold its part of the contract, the society maintains the right to destroy the government and craft a new one.
But the part of the contract is to protect the citizens from outside violence and from internal violence. If it's peaceful, it fulfills its duty in the contract, and that makes North Korea an excellent state.
That's not true, because they don't protect their people from violence. They enact violence on their own people.
Very, very rarely. They act a whole shitload of coercion, which is the mechanism they're allowed to enact in social contract theory. See, social contract theory justifies, permits, and legitimizes coercion insofar as the government is able to meet these basic needs. But that's not what government is at all. Government is instead a bunch of individual human beings pulling bullshit for bullshit reasons.
I don't think that's true. Because if we didn't have it, I cannot think of any historical example in which great civic undertakings happened without a governmental force.
Regardless, you haven't answered any of my objections to social contract theory.
Yeah, I did.
No, you didn't. You didn't answer the objections. You simply said, yes, it is different. Yes, it manifests differently. Yes, nobody signed it. And yet you still have obligations. That's not answering it. That's just ignoring it.
You're arguing that nobody signed the contract.
I mean, nobody agreed to it. And nobody knows what it is.
Okay. I responded very succinctly. All I said was, look, signing it does not mean actually being there to sign the contract.
I didn't agree.
I know you didn't agree, and that's why
that's the same as signing. I didn't say. I may have said signing at one point, but I've shifted now to agreeing instead of the verb signing.
Okay, agreeing is achieved when you deem it permissible.
But you can't even tell me what I agreed to except for the current interpretation by other people of a law that binds me to obligations, that supposedly binds them to duties, but affords no mechanism to hold them accountable, but affords them all the mechanisms they want to hold me accountable. That cannot possibly be a contract. That is slavery.
One, you're arguing that there is no mechanism to hold that accountable. I would argue that that's a fallacy. There is definitely civilians to hold them accountable.
In North Korea, there's not, right?
No, I don't. They could totally revolt if they choose to. They just don't want to.
That's not a mechanism. That's rejection of the social contract.
So rejection is not an act.
Listen, if you're rejecting the social contract in that fashion, civil war, then what you're saying is my government has failed to fulfill the social contract, right?
Yes.
Otherwise, you have the duty to not revolt, right?
Yeah. If they don't.
However, if that's the case, then the North Koreans have no way out because their government doesn't fulfill the social contract. They don't have any mechanism to fix it, but they have no justification for revolt.
So do you agree with me that protection from the state of nature is a part of the communitarian interpretation of social contract theory, like giving power?
I agree. Yeah, I agree with that. That's part of that. It's part of communitarian theory. Yeah.
Okay, so the reason that North Korea fails to uphold communitarian theory is they can't sustain a functioning power grid. Thus, they can't maintain their society outside of a state of nature, and they fail their obligations under social contract theory.
Okay, well, my power went out the other night. How many power I should take before this happened?
That was not a failure of government. As you said, that was a failure of yourself. The government power system.
I'm talking about a different one. I'm talking about my neighborhood had a power outage the other night.
Okay, was it due to lack of infrastructure or due to an act of nature?
Okay, well, let's check the contract to make sure that distinction's made there. Oh, wait, that's right. There is no contract. There is no fucking distinction. It's made up bullshit to justify made up bullshit.
Yeah, everything is eventually made up if you look at it that level.
Not my theory. My
Negative rights is made up.
My theory is fucking consistent. It's sound. The rights don't conflict with each other. You can't use this to justify bullshit. That's the difference.
No, the reason that's not true is specifically because, look, social contract theory, one, doesn't fall into your idea that it is only a one-way street in which the monopoly of power...
It falls into any idea because it's not defined.
It is defined.
No, it's not. It's whatever government you want it to be.
No, it has to fulfill at least two obligations. That is its definition.
Okay, but why those two and not some others?
Because those two obligations are the only ones that don't require negative rights violations.
But then if we are justifying your social contract theory with negative rights theory, why don't we just go with negative rights theory? Because social contract theory conflicts with it.
No, because negative rights theory often falls into a lot of capitalist interpretations, and capitalist interpretations
are good.
They're not always good.
Yes, they are.
Okay, so because
capitalism is simply the lack of restraint upon individuals wishing to behave as they wish without illegal and unjustified coercion and constraint.
That is not true.
Yes,
capitalism doesn't give a damn about legality. That's why we have Chevron being able to go overseas and create a civil war in Sudan to justify their capitalistic gains.
Capitalism cares a great deal about legality when legality conforms with reasonable expectations of constraint on human behavior. No reasonable person, no decent human being, capitalist or otherwise, believes that it's a good idea to kill people to make money. Now, when those capitalists who are so evil as individuals, regardless of whether they're capitalists or communists or anything fucking else they're saying, they go around murdering people, they should be held accountable to it under the negative rights framework, which is the same framework that supports their right to be capitalists.
I don't like the negative rights framework when it supports the idea that the individual is more important than the community.
The individual is the community. The only way we can best serve the community is by guaranteeing each individual that his rights are as equal and protected as every other person's rights, and that no justification beyond responsive use of force can ever justify violence. And we actually ascribe to that position that the group is best served because each individual is protected. If we try to serve the group's interests, then if we guarantee the individuals are oppressed, because the individual will always go against the group's purpose. And if they are not violating any rights, they do not serve any oppression in that fashion.
Okay, no, because capitalism is highly susceptible to co-optation, which means at any instance when you try to use a capitalist paradigm to solve for a mechanism of the status quo, all that's going to happen is you're going to create a new commodity which is traded and sold just like anything else.
I'm not trying to solve. That's your problem. That's your problem. You keep trying to solve other people's problems. What I'm saying is we need to get the fuck out of the way and let them solve their own problems.
Okay, and I'm saying that there are instances in which it's physically impossible for somebody to solve their own problem.
Okay, well then that's fine. There are small groups that need to attend to that. Their local community, their church, whatever. But what we cannot do is put me in your fucking we. And that's what everybody who's communitarian, quote unquote, what that means I'm a violent fucking thug who justifies violent fucking thuggery for no good reason.
That is not true.
Yes, it is true.
No, because you're assuming that I don't believe in your idea that violence is only justified as reciprocal action.
If you did, then you wouldn't need your social contract theory, because all it does is justify exceptions to that.
Yes, I do, because there's nobody around who actually employs that kind of philosophy every single day of their life.
But now you're shifting ground to you say that somehow your meaningless, undefined social contract theory is more utilitarianly useful than my negative rights theory.
No.
Actually, an outcome that produces meaningful.
The reason that I think the communitarian theory is better when paired with the
negative rights framework.
Yeah, the negative rights framework, as opposed to pairing it with the capitalist framework, is because the capitalist framework dooms us always to commodify everything, and I don't think that that's okay.
There is no capitalist framework. Look, the thing is, you are mistaking them as being on the same level. Both communitarianism and capitalism are subsets of negative rights framework. If you don't prevent people from doing what they want, capitalism naturally occurs. If you do prevent people from doing what you want, communitarianism naturally occurs. And then communitarianism is the rhetoric that's used to justify the violence. But remember, it's always easier to commit murder than it is to justify it. And that's exactly what communitarians are desperate to do is justify the murder they commit all the time.
I don't believe that communitarianism entails murder.
They love it. They love murder.
How does communitarianism love murder?
Well, first they want to point guns at you to steal shit from you.
Okay.
Then they want to, if you don't agree to that, they want to lock you in a cage. But if you don't like to go in the cage, then they shoot you.
Okay.
So you see, what I'm saying is, instead of finding fancy ways to justify a thug coming and stealing money from you at gunpoint, let's not do that at all.
Okay, so in a world where we have no government absent the negative rights framework in a capitalist system, what's to stop the capitalist system from co-opting the government forces into saying that it's more beneficial for you to stay out of this negative rights violation because it imposes unjust restrictions on me?
It's very simple. If they're right, first of all, there's no because. You can't do this. You can't do this negative rights violation. That's it. That's the end of the sentence. There's no because. The because is it's a negative rights violation. It's inherently wrong. That's how we define what's immoral.
Okay, so
we begin all discussions of morality on property rights. All discussions of morality begin on property rights. All discussions of morality are predicated on the fact that you own your own body. Every single justification you try to make to deny that fact, to turn yourself and others into slaves, is immoral.
I don't own my body because owning your body is the concept which is a prerequisite to slavery. If people are property, they can be commodified, bought and sold.
Wrong, because here's what. You cannot sell yourself because you cannot sell your moral agency. And that's the core principle of the negative rights framework. One's moral agency cannot be sold because it cannot actually be given away.
Okay, so guards at Auschwitz can compromise their moral agency?
They didn't sell it.
But compromise and selling are still methods of coercion. Did they not compromise themselves?
What I'm saying is what they did was commit negative rights violations.
Yeah.
Everything else is irrelevant.
But no, it's not.
Why?
You make the argument that morally extricating yourself from your own decisions and allowing the government to decide for you is bad.
No, I make the argument that you cannot sell yourself into slavery because you're trying to sell something you cannot hand over, your moral agency.
Okay, how do you respond to the idea that regardless of whether or not you can actually sell an intangible object, you can still sell your willingness to change your interpretation of that intangible object so that it benefits the mechanisms of the status quo?
No, because that change is not real. You're pretending to sell. You're selling a pretend thing. You cannot actually hand your will over. You have to willfully agree to do that every time you're actually asked to give over your will. So when you say, you now own my will, that is a lie. That person does not own it because they cannot independently exercise it. They have to exercise it through your cooperation only.
I know.
So therefore, that's why you can't sell yourself. And that's why that argument against the property rights in your own body falls apart immediately. It fails.
No, because while I do believe it's impossible to sell the idea of free will because free will is not a tangible object, thus cannot be bought or sold, I do believe just like labor hours can be bought and sold, so can your cooperation with the mechanisms of the status quo.
Then you're getting paid for a job. If it's not slavery, if it is slavery, then it violates what I said. If it's not slavery, then you're doing a job. And there's no way to get around this point. So I win this point. That first thing is done. You have no claim to deny negative rights on the grounds and allow slavery.
Okay, but really? So you wouldn't argue that the people that were forced to kill, like Sonderkommandos, Jews forced to kill other Jews, you don't think that they were forced into slavery?
I think they were. What I'm saying is your objection to the negative rights framework was that allows for slavery.
Capitalist paradigm using negative rights.
No, because if the capitalist paradigm violates the negative rights framework supervenes, and everything else supervenes on that. So we cannot allow a higher level thing to win when it's in conflict with an axiomatic thing. If a capitalist framework does purport negative rights framework, then it's not capitalism at that point. Capitalism is free, mutually consented action only.
So would you argue that it's a negative right to seek employment without undue interference?
Yes.
Would you argue that it's a negative right to propose the easiest available wage as a producer, like a company owner?
I think it's any party's right to offer in exchange of wealth or an exchange of service, yes.
Then what's to stop an instance of a large majority of individuals crowding a small amount of work, and the company seeing that it no longer has to provide this inflated amount of funds in order to convince workers to work there?
Nothing. I hope we get rid of wage slavery as soon as possible. I want to diminish it as much as possible. The problem is all the regulations that prevent individuals from doing what they ought to do, which is become entrepreneurs and own their own fucking labor.
Yeah, you can own your own labor. However, you owning your own labor doesn't mean that if the pool is all of a sudden inflated, that
Why is it all of a sudden inflated?
Because the world is growing at an exponential rate. Population is growing.
But it's not. The actual rate of population increase is diminishing.
Only in a couple of specific countries.
Overall, the rate of increase is slowing.
I would argue only in developed countries.
Actually, if you look overall, if you look at all the numbers, the speed of population growth is slowing, and that's factual. Well, it's still growing. It's still growing, but the rate is slowing, and it's not a sign that we're engaged in some sort of runaway population spiral, but rather that we're reaching an equilibrium at some point.
I don't think we've reached anywhere near an equilibrium.
I don't say we've reached it yet. It suggests that, not what you're suggesting.
But back to my original point. The reason I think that a negative rights framework, when applied through a capitalist paradigm, specifically one that stresses individual freedoms as opposed to community goods, is bad, is because it opens the door for individuals to, one, sell themselves short, and two, others to justify themselves short because they're not asking for anything more, after all.
It doesn't need a paradigm. There is no paradigm. There's no capitalist paradigm. It's a fucking lie. The only thing there is negative rights framework. Oh, you're either preventing me from doing what I want. I want to sell this thing on eBay to this guy in Canada. You're either saying, no, I'm going to get involved. I'm going to take some money from you now. I'm going to do whatever else, or you're not. And that's it. If it's a capitalist paradigm, if it means anything at all, it means exactly the same thing as the negative rights framework, which is let us do what we want. We'll profit off it if we can. That's it. Yeah, if in fact that's not conducive to good jobs for Americans, whatever, I don't want to do Americans to another couple generations of employeehood. That's not what Americans are meant to be doing. We should be either independent contractors or business owners or apprentices. If you're in an apprentice position, you're in an employee kind of a position, but it's for the purpose of raising you up to be a business owner or something. It's not to keep you fucking locked there forever. I would never do that to an employee.
Communitarianism is about keeping people locked in a specific situation.
Oh, of course it is. Because it thinks it can centrally plan when actually all it does is centrally restrict. There's no way that any central planning agency can better determine how I should spend my money than I can. You know, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, first of all, I believe that instances like the federal government having to step in and say that the distribution of education funds was jacked up, and your interpretation
should be public. Education shouldn't be public. You tell me why Mr. fucking rant about how shitty public education is.
I know shitty public education is a bad thing. I still don't think that public education should be thrown away. I think we should hold our public education to a higher standard.
The 50,000 education reforms we've gone through already, none of which worked, show that we're on the right track, trying to fix this fundamentally broken thing. But it's fundamentally broken because nobody has any incentive to do well.
No, because communitarian education frameworks work in other countries. Why is there a reason to do it?
They don't work.
They didn't work in Scandinavia? They didn't work in Japan?
Compared to free market education? Hell no. Not even close. Never, ever, 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 because there's no impetus to do well.
Like, the best free market education scheme I could look at is, like, either Norway or some other Nordic country, because they have the highest incidence of private schools. And I would argue that all those private schools have done specifically is increase negative elitism and contribute to shit.
I'm not talking about full-day schools at all, okay? The whole full-day school model is bullshit. What I'm saying is that you give me fucking your fanciest fucking private school, send their kids, and put them up against mine. I'll fucking kick their ass. Okay. Why? Because I fucking care. That's why I'm able to be in the free market. I fucking care. Who doesn't care? Public school teachers, they don't fucking care. It doesn't matter how well they do. Do you think Delilah's teacher would care for nothing but fucking posters to do in history class? Bunch of posters like, draw some symbols from the 50s on this poster and put some color and fucking glitter on it. You think that teacher cared? She thought she was doing a good job. That's how normalized this insanity is.
Okay, one, I'm not going to sit here and listen to the argument that one example of a communitary school system proves that all communitary school systems are
one
falling.
Example? Wait, are you saying that most public schools here are good?
No, I'm saying that public schools outside of the United States are good.
Are you saying that those public schools are good compared to this?
Yes!
You're crazy.
Oh, really? Is that why public schools in Japan are whooping our ass in STEM research?
Compared to this. autonomy debate. Now, I'm not a science person, but if I were, and I had autonomy stem cell research, I guarantee we'd be doing better than Japan. Because if I found out they were doing better, I'd fucking kill myself if we did better, right? Because I want to win. Wanting to win is something in the free market. It's compete, right?
Yeah.
Schools, they don't care. They don't fucking care. Why should they care?
Communitarianism doesn't negate competition.
Of course it does.
Okay.
It's its whole mechanism.
It's not an Orwellian interpretation of communitarianism where we make
its whole mechanism is let's have less free choice and more we decide for you. That's its whole. It's the entirety of communitarianism.
It's not we decide for you in every instance.
No, it's not. But it's more of that.
It's we decide for you in instances
more
where
than we do now.
More than at all, because you're arguing that they shouldn't be able to step in unless I physically cause harm to another individual.
Okay, so you want to say we want to cause non-responsive harm?
No.
But that's what you do.
No. Communitarianism doesn't cause non-responsive harm.
Of course it does. You just said we want to step in even though no harm has been caused. You say step in, what you mean is coerce with guns.
Physical harm. No. I don't want us to have to sit and wait for us to get into the dump to act. I want us to be able to say, it smells like something shitty is about to happen. We should probably take preemptive measures to ensure that worse doesn't occur.
Well, here's the good news, Felix. Well, I have great faith in your predictive abilities, and I don't doubt that your predicted outcomes are 90% sure. Your harms are 100% sure. So that's why we don't choose your way, because even though I know you're extremely bright, you don't represent the single decision maker. And if you did, you're not me, so you couldn't always be right. But the thing is, every human is wrong. Right?
Yeah.
All the humans up there are wrong. They all want their own wrongness imposed.
Yes.
You like your wrongness, and you want your wrongness imposed. But see, my wrongness doesn't impose anything on anybody else. That's why my wrongness is the only wrongness that's okay.
That's not true.
That is true. It's the whole fucking definition of my wrongness.
No, like, you earlier agreed that taxation didn't have to be monetary. Your ability to not wear a hat was a form of behavioral taxation, correct?
Okay, it was a stretch of the term, but okay, you got me. You're right. You're thinking of memory, right? You're going to remember the one thing you use. You're not going to remember anything else I say. I remember any of the point. You're not going to remember the fact that your fucking social contract is sitting on the ground and shatters. But
no,
that.
Okay. What I'm remembering is the idea that because behavioral taxation exists within your paradigm, the harms that you experience under a negative rights individualist framework are just as severe and provide no preference to mine.
No, because in my example, someone is doing something to you. In your example, no one is doing something to you, and you're claiming it's equivalent at all under the negative rights framework. That's the whole fucking point of it. Under your model, if you drive thirsty, you sat in the middle of the fucking forest, didn't drink any water,
that's my own fault.
You know, under your model, it's not.
That's not true.
The communitarian model is based on the principle of entitlements. Rights that are not rights, that are entitlements. But they call them rights. Positive rights that are not actually contractual.
Yes, they're not rights.
Okay. The whole communitarianism is founded on the notion of entitlements.
Okay.
It's crime. It's called entitlements.
Okay. On the specific thing of water, that's a really bad example. Like,
perfect example. No,
it's not, because communitarianism doesn't argue that I have to take it upon myself to reverse your shitty decision to wander into the woods without supplies.
But of course it does. You just said we have to help this old people's shitty decision to wander into Detroit without paying their heating bill.
They didn't have a choice to pay their heating bill.
I see.
They couldn't afford their heating bill.
So the communitarian's going to say whether I wandered into the forest or whether it was my disadvantaged circumstances that caused me to
the communitarian would say in that example the forest sprang up around you.
Right, yeah, well that's bullshit though, right?
How is that bullshit?
Because, listen, even if the forest sprang up around me, that would imply a complete lack of agency on the behalf of the disenfranchised. Your position is fundamentally elitist and it denies equal humanity to the other. You must have that other to coddle in order to justify your own intervention in the lives of others. Now that is as wicked an act as anybody can possibly do. And the fact that communitarians continue to try to hold some sort of moral high ground is laughably absurd.
This is not the moral high ground. This is simply me saying that, one, I'm not arguing that the forest springing up around you implies that you can't make your way out of the forest. I'm saying that there are specific individuals which society at an individualistic level overlooks due to their personal gain, and those impacts deserve to be addressed by the government. And those.
But hold on. What about the millions more individuals who get overlooked when the government addresses something? See, when you keep using these words, what you mean is there are people out there who make bad decisions and fuck up their life and they're fucked up, and it's really sad. And we were really sad about it. We wish they weren't that way. Now, we already know that when we try to steal money and redistribute it, it doesn't work, because that's why we still have homeless people, despite all the homeless shelters and stuff like that, because a lot of people are in a bad shape because they're addicted to drugs or mentally ill, and we cannot fix them without sacrificing their free will. We won't do that because that's worse. Now, what we do know for a fact is that we are going to commit harm to people when we justify coercion with unjustified reasons. So if we give reasons that aren't response to violence, then we know that we're the aggressors. So we don't want to ever advocate for any sort of aggression against people and then say, well, it's okay this time. Because when we say it's okay this time,
it can be okay another time.
Yeah, it can be okay another. It's okay for everybody's bad idea. Now, the only idea, no matter how bad you think it is, that doesn't do that is mine. It's not my idea. I didn't come up with it or anything.
No, I know, but the one you're advocating.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't think that you're giving communitarianism a whole lot of credit. You literally just said that if a negative impact occurred in communitarianism, our only response would be to first blame the victim, to assume that the victim cannot extricate themselves from their own situation.
They're not blaming the victim. That's the problem. They're not blaming the victim. They're saying you're a victim. They are reducing a human being into a victim so that they can justify their violence to protect that victim. But that human being never even agreed to be a victim.
Okay.
They didn't pay the electricity bill because they wanted to rub it for a month.
Okay, in that instance, that's a fully fledged decision. I would argue that there's not every individual making that decision. I don't think that the elderly person whose electricity or gas got shut off was thinking, I feel like being more rustic this winter.
I agree with you. However, what I also know is that the good news is you have yourself to take care of, and I have myself to take care of. And we don't have to be responsible for somebody else to take care of themselves. If we are, then we're imposing on them.
Okay, so let me see if
it's not kindness, it's ontological violence.
Okay, so let me see if I get this right. The best way to address, for example, poverty through
Don't address it.
Can I?
Yeah, sure.
All right, so my juxtaposition is the best way to address poverty through a negative rights individualist framework is to allow the market to fix it by lowering their own prices because nobody's buying their shit.
The best way to address poverty is to never use the expression address poverty, because we quote unquote don't address poverty. That's a lie. What we actually do is burn a bunch of wealth and say, ooh, look, these poor people got some free money. That's not addressing poverty. That's being fucking moronic.
So is a doctor burning precious medical supplies by by upholding their Hippocratic oath and treating me without me paying them?
No, they are choosing voluntarily to engage in charity for you because they prefer to help you than to be a hard ass about their money, as is their choice.
And do you think that communitarianism forces people to act outside what would be normal charity?
I say communitarianism thinks that if they think that's a good idea, then the doctor that does it willingly, that's okay. And a doctor who chooses not to, who makes the fully aware and consenting and self-determined choice not to, that person has to be forced to. Well, that's the fucking problem. It's not whether or not the morality is true or not. It's the fact that you are bastardizing a true moral fact. Like, it's good to help people. Altruism is good. Mm-hmm. And you were taking that and using it to justify your evil of coercion is the most wicked sort of thing imaginable. And it's exactly what communitarianism does. When you start talking about that person who can't, blah, 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 you have already diminished him. He's no longer a human being. He's somebody who's a pawn in your fucking justifications for state violence.
So let's go back to the medical example.
Okay.
Is a doctor being coercive in operating on an individual who cannot perform an operation themselves?
No.
Then why is it coercive for a community to engage in a societal ill that an individual level cannot address?
Okay, because your analogy is terrible, number one.
Okay, why?
Because here's why. Because in the first instance, you're saying the doctor is operating on a patient who is consented to be operated on. solve a problem that that individual patient has as an individual. The individual doctor has engaged in an individual contract with that individual patient to do a surgery, and therefore does it to help the person. That is called a free exchange of wealth for services. Now, in the other example, you're saying, well, here's somebody who can't help himself.
No, the original medical example was somebody who can't pay for their medicine getting surgery. Not only are they not conscious to give consent, engage in a private contract, they are unable to fulfill the obligations of that private contract by providing just compensation to the doctor.
Well, but the doctor agreed to do that ahead of time. The contract was for no money.
And that communitarian contract is bad?
It's not communitarian.
How is it not communitarian to expect the doctor to...
Because the doctor is not forced to do it, and neither is the patient. That's why communitarianism necessarily involves coercion. Otherwise, it's not the group compelling the individual to change for purported group goals that nobody even fucking agrees on.
Okay, so if nobody agreed, so would you argue that nobody in the United States has a specific agreement on why they believe murder is bad?
That is proof of my point. The only ones we do have agreement on are negative rights things.
I don't know, because I don't think we all agree on, you didn't agree with me on the energy position, right? You didn't think that was a negative right? Or did you think that was a negative right? That you have the right to energy?
Even if I agree you did, it wouldn't be a negative right, it would be a positive right. It would be an entitlement. You're saying it stems from your social contract, which still hasn't been rebuilt.
Wait, no, okay, so it's a positive right because I'm demanding you produce energy for me.
It is actually an entitlement. A communitarian would call it a positive right. It's not a right at all.
Okay, why is it? It's an entitlement because I have no just cause to demand energy from you.
No just cause to demand anything from you.
Okay, so that's the reason it's entitlement.
Yeah. Unless we have some sort of contract or charity or something like that. You know, that's the reason why that exchange might occur. Coercion is never a just reason for that unless there's been some sort of injustice that it needs to be righted.
Okay, so first of all, I don't think that communitarianism is necessitative of coercion. I think charity and communitarianism are fundamentally the same.
No. Communitarianism necessarily says we must, and it's okay to use coercion to force individuals to help the group goals at the expense of their own will and their own interests and their own wealth. That's communitarianism. And it fundamentally is predicated on the notion that there's a big pile of money that gets split up amongst everybody. Rather than the reality, which is each individual generates his own wealth by applying labor to resources.
Okay, so let's see. Every individual generates their own wealth, thus nobody's entitled to the sweat of that individual other than the individual themselves.
Right.
If that individual is not capable of providing that sweat, what is the individual outside of that person's motivation to ensure that that individual has something?
It's up to each individual. There are going to be charitable ones. They're going to feel morally obligated to do something for those people. There are going to be other individuals who are selfish. That's up to each individual. The important thing to remember is that a correct system will necessarily have people who we lament have lost meaningful lives and have not been able to live meaningful lives for any number of reasons, whether it be they're too poor, whether it be they've got disabilities and they don't have any friends or family or whatever. It's going to be tragic. But we have to remember that if we try to do any sort of group action, we are only going to create massively more harm than we solve. Always, every single time. If we allow the government to exceed its natural constraint and its natural role, it has a monopoly on use of force because it's constrained to use that force in legitimate ways. Otherwise, it doesn't have
as a response.
Yeah, otherwise it doesn't have any legitimate monopoly on use of force. Its monopoly is just because it has the most guns there. It's either might make right or it's negative rights. And every other thing collapses to might make right.
Okay, so might makes right. You're arguing that the only reason there's a monopoly of power is because they have the most guns, right?
I'm arguing that because their monopoly of power is only legitimate when they use it in legitimate ways.
Okay.
And
so war was only justified to stop the Holocaust.
Well, I don't want to talk about war because that's a separate issue.
Okay,
use of force within the domestic scene.
Okay, so
Without
is
compliance.
using the military guard to escort the first individuals for Plessy versus Ferguson.
Okay, well, again,
Is that a reactive use of force?
the problem with that is that would be justified if
The battery's going to die. Do I turn it off?
yeah, just stop. Okay, thanks for talking to people. That was a good argument, Felix. That's good. That was fucking.